Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this latest in our series of panel webinars that Business Gateway has been organising. This afternoon, we are going to be looking at the whole kind of idea of being able to turn a hobby or a side hustle into a functioning business. But before we get started, I just want to go over some of the kind of housekeeping for you. We do have everyone placed on mute just to avoid any background noise. We are going to record the session so that it can be made available afterwards to yourselves and to those who couldn't make it. Please, if you've got questions, submit them through the portal. We will try and get to them as we work through the session, and if we don't, we will come back to you on those later on. And anything that we kind of produce today or talk about today, we will be able to kind of follow up on afterwards. So, as I said, what we're looking to do to cover today is that next step that you need to take in turning your hobby or side hustle into a business. And sometimes that can be down to a lack of confidence in yourself or your business idea. But with just maybe a few steps, you can be ready to take that leap. So today we have an amazing group of people who've come together for the panel to help kind of work our way through that. And in particular, we're partnered today with a confidence coach, and through Nick and our colleagues today, we'll be able to share tips on how to find the confidence to take the plunge and turn your side hustle into a business. So let me introduce the panel first of all. We have Nick Henderson, who's a life and confidence coach. We have Callum Ross, who's founder of the Cycling Gardeners of Edinburgh. And we have Jeff Hume, who's one of our network of experienced and knowledgeable Business Gateway advisors. So I'm going to start by asking Nick to kind of talk about what she does and to talk about the kind of issues of confidence and sort of ideas and thoughts about how to overcome that. Nick, welcome.
Thank you, Hugh. Yeah, it's something that I see quite a lot with people who are starting out in a business, because obviously it takes a lot of courage to put your idea out into the world, and you know, it can manifest in many ways. And as someone who has started my own business, I totally understand how scary that can be, but also really exciting. So it's almost like you're trying to balance something that's really exciting, but also something that you might be really scared of. So just to give you a little bit of background about what I do, I moved from a very corporate role in fashion, and I moved 5 years ago into this wellness coaching space. And I now run wellness retreats, coaching, do corporate coaching, run events, wellness type activities and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of grown into this thing that I could never have possibly imagined when I began, but it did take the confidence and building that in myself to get to where I am right now. So I want to really highlight for people how that can manifest, because sometimes when you're in it, you can't really see it. So I've narrowed it down. There's many ways that this can manifest, but the top 5 I think are overthinking and procrastination. Now, I think for everyone who's listening, if this is you, try and write down if, oh yeah, that's me, you know, keep a note of this as you go where the things flag up, because this could be you thinking, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if X, Y, Z? It could be an element of catastrophizing a little bit, which is completely normal. But you need to be able to identify when you're overthinking and when you are procrastinating, when you're getting yourself stuck in a little bit of sometimes what they call analysis paralysis, when you're just looking at the data too much and you're getting nowhere. The second one is self-doubt. So this is, am I really good enough to do this? Can I really run a business? Will anyone actually pay me for these goods and services? And this self-doubt in your own personal abilities can lead to a reluctance to move forward. The third one is probably the biggest one, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, because it's the fear of failure. So this is something that can really dominate your thoughts. It can lead you to avoid taking risks that you normally would. It can lead you to maybe to avoid scaling up or growing, to invest in your marketing, to hire more people. And these avoidance behaviors are really critical to identify. So these can also manifest in different ways. So it could be avoiding financial risks. You don't want to really put yourself forward at that level, and maybe subconsciously you're trying to keep your business at a hobby level because it's safer. So there might be a little aversion there to financial risks. The second one is limited goal setting. You might be almost holding yourself back a little bit and underestimating your actual potential. So you might be aiming for just enough to get yourself by, or a reasonable amount, but you may not be able to see yet what you could actually achieve. There might also be a reluctance to promote the business. You know, if you're afraid of getting on social media, if you don't want to really put yourself out there, which is really common, I feel like, among the clients that I talk to, you can miss opportunities for growth in that space. And almost in a way, it leads it on to the next one, which is isolation. You keep yourself stuck in your little bubble with your ideas, which is great, but it's holding you back. It limits your resources, your support. You may not reach out to an advisor who can help you, and there's lots of opportunities that get missed that way. And the last one, which pops up quite a lot, is a difficulty in charging what you're worth, you know, for your services, a difficulty in really charging what your business is worth, and the effort and the time that you've put in, that's worth that number that you're afraid of. And sometimes that can be interesting to see what's going on behind the scenes there and what do you really believe. Now, two more quick ones is if you're seeking validation from other people a little bit too much, it's just a sign that you don't trust yourself enough yet. So just notice if you're doing that. And obviously it's great to have support from other people, but if you're relying on other people's opinions just a little bit too much before making a decision, it just means that you have to come back and trust yourself a little bit more. And the last one, just I want to mention quickly, is the whole concept of imposter syndrome. Now, the thing that I hear all the time about this is, now I've spoken to CEOs and really incredible people who have this. So please, everyone, understand that everyone has this to a certain extent. It's just that when it pops up, and when it pops up, you need to have the skills and tools to be able to just knock that back down and continue regardless. You are qualified to start your own business, even when you feel like you're not. Does that make sense?
A great deal of sense. Absolutely. Absolutely. Nick, that's been very insightful. Thank you for that. You just touched on something there, fear of failure.
Yeah.
We actually ran a panel webinar a few months ago now with Vicky Brock, who is an entrepreneur, fantastic lady. And we have that webinar recorded that was all about fear of failure. We'll put a link to that in the chat later on for folk, because they might want to go back and have another look at that. So that's a really good start for us. Some good things for people to be thinking about. And I'm going to come to Callum now, because I'm absolutely fascinated, Callum, to hear more about the cycling gardeners of Edinburgh, and I'm particularly wondering some of the things that Nick's covered there, if that kind of chimes with you in the journey that you've been on.
Absolutely. When Nick was mentioning imposter syndrome there, confidence and these kind of things, I've been on those journeys and down those routes. I think I'm in quite a fortunate position with this company. One of the reasons I've been invited is that it started off as a side hustle. So there wasn't maybe quite the same pressure, at least originally when it was a side hustle, there wasn't quite the same fear of failure and whatnot. There was definitely when I was growing it, the imposter syndrome was there. But I had a background in events, and I started up an events company before COVID came along, which obviously put a major dent in that. So I'd sort of been through a lot of that with that. So it felt when this was an idea that I was doing on the side. And in some ways, I strangely might have benefited from everything that happened in COVID, giving me a bit of a forced hiatus from events to have a little think and try out a little side hustle and do stuff like that. So it was something there on the side that, when the realization came how much weight it had as an idea, as a concept and a business model, that was when I was like, right, I can jump into this. So I think I was in quite a fortunate position with this company, you know, for the fear of failure wasn't quite there, because it wasn't, which I did have with the events company, you know, throwing everything into, you know, events and whatnot. That was quite a big fear of failure. So second time round in a bit of a different industry and whatnot, actually, I think helped me quite a bit there.
Brilliant.
So
Brilliant.
you asked a little bit about this. Should I tell you a little bit about the cycling gardeners?
Please.
So yeah, so as I said, background in events and gardening, but my focus was for many years when I was younger was events. And obviously COVID stopped that, so it was a lovely chance to try something different out. Again, and throw myself back into an old industry I was part of, and realized that a lot of my project management skills developed in the events industry could be lent to the gardening industry. So started making money through gardening. As soon as lockdown hit, I was out there in a spade in my garden thinking, I've finally got time to work in my garden, you know, which was a hobby that I really loved. And then I suddenly realized, oh, I can start doing this for a living. You know, I can start putting myself out there as a gardener. So started working in the gardening industry. And before long as well, found myself being approached by another couple of gardeners saying, hey, do you want to join team with us and join our company? So before he knew it, I was helping basically in this startup gardening company. It was sort of a side thing as well, full-time during COVID. And then the idea, just from being part of the industry and looking what was going on and how it was operating and seeing problems within it, we had the idea of getting a bike. And then we tried it out. And through a space of a couple of years of looking into the idea, doing a lot of research into it, buying a bike, trying it out, seeing how well it was going, and then finally last year taking the jump to actually go for it as an actual company. So I quite a kind of lead in that allowed us to kind of try things out, find our feet, and then think it was a good thing to go for.
Brilliant. I'm going to turn to Jeff. We're going to do kind of Q&A afterwards as well. There's a few things we want to try and expand on and explore a wee bit more. Jeff, can I come to yourself? As I said at the beginning here, Jeff is one of our network of experienced advisors all over the country that we have. And Jeff, what I'd like from yourself, obviously, is to share how Business Gateway approaches working with startups, and particularly how to encourage people to grow in confidence, believe in themselves, believe in their business, and perhaps some of the practical first steps to consider and what they need to do.
Yeah, I think Nick and Callum have touched on some of the things I'm going to raise anyway. So the first thing I always discuss with anyone who said they're thinking about starting a business is that you've already made a brave decision. You know, you've already, I think it's something like 15% of people will ever work for themselves. So the vast majority of people will only ever work for someone else. And so I say to them, just simply by thinking about wanting to have your own business, you've already demonstrated a degree of courage. You know, Nick mentioned that earlier on. If they're already up and running, one of the things I always like to do with people is actually acknowledge what they've done and celebrate the successes they've already had, because, it can be quite a lonely place running your own business, and somebody patting you on the back and just saying, well done, you're not doing anything wrong, keep doing it, I think is quite a good thing to do. I discuss with people, one of the things I say to them is say, setting up your own business, it's not a one-way street. It's not like once you've set up your own company, you have to have your own company forever. If you get into it and you find you don't like it, you can always go back and be one of the other 85% who've got a job. It's not a life sentence, it's an option. The other thing I say to people, and Callum touched on this here, it's all right having a hybrid business. It's all right being partly employed and partly self-employed at the same time. And it is very common for people to set up their businesses. And I did this with my own first business. I was a hybrid business for 18 months where I did my self-employment at evenings and weekends till the point where I realized, yes, this is a viable way of making a living. And then gradually went to working part-time in my business, and eventually got to the point where I actually got the option of getting made voluntarily redundant, and that was the thing that gave me the kick up the backside to finally jump and commit to it. And this is very common. We talked about Nala with the Insect Cafe earlier on, and Nala, her contract came to an end, and that was the thing that actually prompted her to step and do her business full time. So, yeah, there is no right or wrong way of setting up a business. So, the other thing I say to people is, use all the free help. I did this when I had my business. Obviously business gateways there, but actually certainly within Edinburgh, the banks offer support, the universities offer support, Federation of Small Businesses, Prince's Trust. There is a long list of people who can help you, and I have no problem with people getting help from multiple locations. Just if it's there and it's being offered, accept it. The other thing I say to people, try and find yourself a buddy. Running a business can be a lonely experience, and if you can get somebody who is prepared to go on that journey with you, then so whether that's a co-founder, whether it's a mentor, whether it's family or friends, if you can get somebody doing the journey with you, then that makes it a lot easier. And I was saying to Callum earlier on that I've got to give a shout out to Margaret, who is his mum, who has been part of his support network, and it is very common for people to have that support network. I was lucky enough that my first company, I had a co-founder, so I had a buddy already, but we very quickly picked up our chap called Terry, and he was what we called our guardian angel from Harrogate. He had run his own business, he had retired, he was bored, he wanted to give something back, and he read something about us in the Sunday papers, and he came and tracked us down and said, can I come and help you? And having a Terry meant that we kind of matured as a business much more quickly than we would have done on our own. Now, obviously, there's not always a Terry out there, and obviously Business Gateway, I say to people, I am your last port of call. You've talked to your family, you've talked to your friends, all your colleagues don't want to talk to you about your business, but I will always talk to you about your business and give you advice. So don't be afraid to come and ask that. The other thing I always say to people is obviously attend as many of the seminars as possible. And I do mean seminars as opposed to webinars, because I think that sitting in a room of like-minded people who are all looking at each other thinking, are we daft thinking to set up our own business? And you realize you're not daft and it is a good idea. I think that's very motivating. And the same goes for attending networking events. If you see somebody standing up in front of you who said, I launched my business 3 years ago, I had all these hiccups and now it's fine, again, can be very motivating to understand that it is normal to go through periods of difficulty. Just to kind of come back to one of the points that Nick said earlier on, one of the most common areas of confidence that I come across is people saying things, I can't possibly charge that they actually struggle to justify why they should be asking for the fee that they deserve to get. And probably one of the things I spend my most amount of time with, or actually, I would say 1% of my clients, I've said, that's a punchy price. 99% of them I've said, you're not charging enough. And one of the areas where I probably spend a lot of my time is actually going through all the different arguments about why they should charge more. I've had logical discussions with people. I've asked them to compare themselves with their competitors. I've had kind of what I'd call emotional discussions with them. Why do you not think you're worth that amount of money? And I've also obviously directed them towards things like the pricing masterclass. I always say people go to the pricing masterclass and go on the sales skills training so that you get much better at actually knowing what you're worth and standing up and trying to get it. You might not always get it. Customer might not be willing to pay, but you should, if you aim low, you're going to end up low. If you aim high, you stand a better chance of being successful. One of the things that we got taught by our Terry, so our angel from Harrogate, was he taught us how to price projects. And we went from losing money in our first year with a relatively modest turnover to having a very good turnover and having a good profit margin in our second year. And that was the one thing we learned from that experience. The other thing that I kind of I guess, quite often discuss with people, and I think this is probably one of the things we discussed with Callum in the early stages, was Callum didn't lack confidence, but he was saying, right, what are you going to focus on? What are you going to prioritize? You know, where are your best customers, and how do you go about finding those best customers? So I always recommend to people that they attend the Startup Market Research.
Oh,
Jeff?
Jeff, come back. We've lost him.
Yeah, well, I'm still here. I haven't.
You're still there. You've gone. Your screen has gone black. Keep talking, sir. Keep talking.
Right, hang a second. Right, let me just something. I'm not sure what happened there, but so one of the things I always recommend to all of my Business Gateway customers is go on the Market Research Startup seminar and be very, very clear about your perfect customer and the perfect intermediary that's going to help you get to them. And then I always say to them, go and talk to the research service and ask them to help them find those customers for you. You don't Google it, use the research service. The analogy I give is, you've got a dog walker's business. You don't go around every house putting a leaflet through the door. You go to the dog training club, and you're going to find a lot more business there. The final thing I was just going to say was, there is a book. It's called Disciplined Entrepreneurship, which I will send a link around. And in that, the chap talks about how you find your first 10 customers, and that's very worthwhile having a read of that book if you can. My final point would be, outsource the stuff that's not essential for you to do. So certainly when I had my company, we outsourced our bookkeeping, we outsourced our accountancy, our HR, our social media, because we could then concentrate on actually winning more customers and growing the business. And I think that knowing where to focus your effort is probably one of the key things.
Okay, thank you for that, Jeff. Hopefully you'll be able to work out how to get out of witness protection and reveal yourself again to us. While you're thinking about that, I just want to make a wee point. Oh yeah, you're back. Brilliant. Jeff had said there, about attending seminars, and by that he meant, physically getting together with people. I'll just make the little point that Business Gateway does run a series of national webinars. We have done that ever since COVID kicked in, because it was the right way to keep our workshops going in the circumstances that we had. We're still running them because it's a very cost-effective way of reaching a lot of people with a lot of the kind of core information that they need. But yes, absolutely, at the local level, or all our kind of local areas are getting back into the swing of little network events, getting people together, and as Jeff says, incredibly valuable in meeting like-minded people and sharing experiences and finding that person that went down the rabbit hole that you're facing and figured out how to get back out of it and can tell you how to do that. So something to think about. We've had a question come in, which, given what we're talking about, with that jumping from a side hustle or from a hobby, the question is, how will I know when is the right time to make the jump? Now, I've got a sneaking suspicion I know what the answer to this is, which is it's going to depend on the circumstances and how long's a piece of string. What's your thoughts on that, folks? Nick, come to you first. When's the right time to make the jump?
Yeah, obviously it's different for everyone, but I think, is there ever really a good time? Maybe not, because circumstances change so much. It's really back to something that Jeff said, is it the time for you to make the decision? Because once you make the decision, there's a level of commitment there. So regardless of what's going on, in your everyday life, you might change a set of circumstances now, next week to next year, but you'll still have problems, you'll still have obstacles, you'll still have reasons why it's not a great time. So I would probably say there isn't a perfect time, other than the time that you decide to commit to your idea and yourself ultimately.
Okay. Another question that's come in there, and invite the panel to think about this one. What's the most useful thing I can do first when I've made the decision to turn my hobby into a business? So let's really focus in here. What is the most useful first thing you can do. Callum, I'm going to come to you first.
I think it's really making a good financial plan for the next couple of years. Obviously, you don't know how it's going to go. But I think for ease of mind, you create targets, and you know if you're staying on target that you can live off. You're not just totally entering the dark. It takes a little bit of a confidence step to say, these are my targets, I'm going to hit them, therefore I can pay the bills. But at least you've got ease of mind, there is a plan. You're not just hoping at the end of each month you're still going to be able to cover your overheads like you did before. And that is a 3-year plan as well, because you unfortunately have to think about what size of the business have to be to actually sustain me, and will that involve getting over the VAT threshold? And if you're looking at getting over the VAT threshold that we've just done as well, that involves really understanding the economics of your growth, and that big jump at that point to unfortunately have to spend more to create the work to then get over the VAT threshold and all of that. So yeah, sitting down with someone that has a good understanding of the financial journey you'll go on, I think is a really good first step for ease of mind and just setting you on a right track. And knowing how long it might take you to get back. If you're dropping a job that was well paid, to know how long it could potentially take you to get back to that place.
Brilliant.
Also, sorry, my computer has just started crackling lots. I'm just wondering if you can hear that.
No, absolutely, hear it fine. Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear.
So I hope it doesn't self-destruct. It's a Surface Pro that's just started going in the corner there. I'll just try to ignore the crackling, and if you do lose me, I'll jump back in on my phone, but we're going to keep trying to that.
Thanks, Callum. So Jeff, just to yourself as well, that kind of the very first thing, the most useful first thing someone could do. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the first thing I wrote down was find a customer. So that's the, and if you can't find a customer, find someone who's going to help you find a customer.
Yeah.
But one of the things Terry helped us establish very early on was cash flow management. So running the business on cash flow, and we used to have a metric that we measured in the business very regularly, which we called it days till we're dead. And it's basically at what point are we going to run out of cash and we won't be able to pay our bills. And so being very focused on cash and winning customers.
Brilliant. Okay. Nick, I'm going to come to you on that one.
The word that jumped to mind was clarity. I think no matter what you're doing, you have to be really clear on what your objective is in that next week, in that next month, in the next quarter, in the next year, because without clarity, it's a bit like the ideas would get all muddled and you're not quite sure of what comes next. So it's having the ability to fuse creativity and enthusiasm and all the wonderful things that you have, all that passion, with obviously that business side of having a plan. So you have to get really, really clear. And sometimes for people, I think that's the business side, but sometimes for others, it's more on the personal side. How do I need to get really clear about myself, what I think about myself, what I need to change, what are my obstacles, what am I struggling with? Because sometimes there might be a little bit of work to be done on that first before jumping into all of the numbers and all of that stuff. So getting really clear on yourself as a person and also the business side, and then fusing that together, I would say.
Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to go on to the kind of questions that we've kind of put together ourselves to kind of tease these ideas out a wee bit further. And Nick, I'm going to come to you first on that. How would you say a lack of confidence typically manifests when someone's considering turning a hobby or a side hustle into a full-fledged business?
Yeah, and these things that we've been speaking about, I bet there's people out there who are going, that's me, with the procrastination, overthinking, anxiety coming up, feeling really stressed, although nothing's actually happened yet. Having all these reservations about yourself. Am I really capable of doing this? What if it fails? And this kind of prediction element of what if, because I think it's important to know that your mind automatically works that way. Your brain is a prediction machine. It's always trying to figure out what is coming next. And if you know that, you can outsmart the system a little bit. You can say, well, I know that this is, just the way my mind is operating, but I'm going to take the action anyway. there's something that I always try and tell people is where you have to take action before you want to in order to inspire yourself. No one will inspire yourself more than taking action against your will when it feels really tough, when everything is telling you not to do it, but when you take that action anyway, and that might be picking up the phone to make an appointment with a business gateway advisor, it might be doing a little bit of research, but taking that action before you want to is really, really important to create the momentum.
And interestingly, we talked earlier about this fear of failure bit, and you'd put in the chat there that you've got some other strategies. Can we kind of touch on those now? And what kind of things well, clearly fear of failure can be a big hurdle for many aspiring entrepreneurs. So what strategies would you recommend to overcome those?
No, I think one of the best things that you can do for yourself is get to know yourself on a deeper level, because there's so many ways that you're already wired as a human being that when you know it, it takes away the power. So I study a lot of the behavioral psychology and why people do what they do, and it's just fascinating stuff. So some of this kind of material would be, you're hardwired for safety above all else. Your natural instinct is not to go into the unknown and the unfamiliar. As human beings, we all want to feel safe and we all want to be comfortable. Now that doesn't really correlate sometimes with being entrepreneurial and breaking the mold and having a new idea, because your brain wants you to be safe first. So again, that's power. When you know that, you're like, oh, I realize I've been holding myself back, but this is a human instinct. I need to, move forward anyway. And there's some other really interesting stuff, like your brain acting like that prediction machine, again, linked to keeping you safe. You are naturally drawn to a negative bias, so you're likely to be able to imagine all the things that could go wrong rather than all the things that could go right. There's also something called confirmation bias, which means that you find what you're looking for. So if you're looking for lots of small businesses that have failed, you'll find them. But if you're looking for lots of small businesses that have succeeded, you'll also find them. So, be careful what you consume and inspire yourself. And also, you have to stimulate your own dopamine levels in your brain. So like your phone is it's just these spikes of dopamine all the time. We get these little hits from social media, but you have to try to create natural, sustainable dopamine levels where you do something that you don't necessarily want to do and activate this reward system in your mind. So you're like, oh my God, I've started the business plan. Now that might be half an hour, that's enough. Tomorrow I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to call Jeff. I'm going to, get these numbers done. I'm going to get myself clear on what's going on. And before you know it, you start to have a little bit of momentum. It doesn't seem so scary because when I feel anxious, I tend to back off. That's when I have to lean in. And knowing that about yourself can change the game a little bit because you're a step ahead of what you would normally do. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
I wonder if I could.
Another question. Sorry, absolutely, Callum.
Sorry, it was just one of the things that was resonating with me so much. So I just wanted to jump in there slightly.
Please do.
I think especially going back to what I think Jeff said about starting your own business can be quite lonely as well. And you can spend a lot of time analyzing and thinking, and getting to know your brain and how it works, I think is really helpful. And so much you were saying there. When I launched into my freelance event crew, my event company, I wasn't doing that at all. One of the actual things I think is nice to mention is during the process through COVID, I was diagnosed with ADHD. So I understand a lot more about how my brain works. And so much of what you were saying there as well are the kind of things I've been learning about that are really helping me on this journey to push this company this time and understand the best way for me to actually, as a business owner, get around. And I'd like to mention ADHD as well, because I have heard that a lot of the finding times when entrepreneurs are people with ADHD, they're more risk-taking. Sometimes actually that helps them overcome in some ways the confidence you're talking about, but all the anxiety and stuff can come with it. So whether or not you are neurodiverse or not, I just think understanding your brain, working your own, and what it takes to get a company off the ground, and speaking to someone like yourself, I think can be really beneficial. And that's something I wish I'd done when I was younger, and I'm really glad I'm actually doing at the moment. So yeah, just wanted to jump in there with that.
That's really good.
I've
Jeff?
got a little. I was going to say, just to add a thing about onto that. I know it's probably hard to believe now, but I used to be a punk in my early days, and one of the things about punk music was no one is going to tell you you cannot have a band, you cannot do this. The fact I had no musical instruments, no musical talent, couldn't sing, or this was not going to stop me having a band and making songs. When it came to setting up my company, lots of people who I were working with at the time were saying things like, "Don't be stupid, you can't run a company." And it was part of that thing in me, that punk inside me, which says, "Don't you tell me that I can't run a company. Don't let anybody tell you what you can't do." And that my first company came because people were telling me I can't do it. And I thought, I'm going to show you. So
now,
so a bit of inner arrogance or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say that punk is one of perhaps the last things I would have thought that you might have been in the past. Jeff. There you go. It's amazing what you find out about folks on these webinars. Callum, you touched there on confidence again. Can I ask you? I mean, you've already taken that leap from, I think, as you described it, a side hustle. What was the biggest factor in building your confidence in your idea?
I actually think it was having a push from the business part at the time. Before we were Cycling Gardeners, we were Andrew James Gardeners, which was an operation I was invited into. And when we're starting out as well, James was working with, he had confidence and he was like, no, we're going to charge this much. And there's a massive disparity in the gardening industry of what people charge. Freelancers barely charging anything. How do they make money on that rate? Companies charging quite a lot. And he pushed and said, no, we'll take less work and only go out if we're getting paid well. I wouldn't have had that confidence to set that price, and I would have probably dabbled about for a couple of years, not made much money and given up, because actually a lot of the rates that people are charging just aren't sustainable when you have to realize that for every hour you do in a garden, there's probably an hour in the background of setting up the work, managing your kit and all of that. So £15 an hour in the garden doesn't work. And so many people think that, oh, I'm earning £20 an hour when I'm in the garden, but they're not actually earning that. And I think having that push to charge a proper professional rate, and then that grew my confidence massively. And I would have had the confidence probably to go sell our services at that rate. And we're still actually competitive to other gardening companies, but that was a massive confidence boost for me. It's like, wow, we are, and we're worth it as well. And I realized that as well, that we're doing good work. So for that, for me, I think it was actually having someone push, you can be a professional. Sorry, we are professionals. We are doing this professionally now. We are setting ourselves up and investing in equipment and doing this properly. And these are the rates we're going to charge. And I'm so grateful for James for having that push, because I probably, would have charged less and not made it work.
We've had a question in, and Jeff, I'm going to come to you just on this one, see what your thoughts are. Someone has indicated they've got a large niche community on social media. How do they turn that already existing community into buying customers? Any advice on how you would transform a community you already have on social media into buying customers?
Well, I guess I wouldn't say I had a silver bullet answer to that one, but it's the usual thing of, what is their interest, what products could exist that you could introduce them to, understand what their needs are as a group. Why have they come together as a group on social media? What is it that they weren't able to find elsewhere? And is there a service and or a product that could align with that need? And I guess it's the usual thing with any group of customers. What do they need, and do you have something that you can pull together that you can offer to them? And then, as Callum says, can you do it at a price that actually makes enough money to make it worthwhile doing in the first place?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that. Nick, I'm going to come back to you. You'd mentioned clarity, and a question's come in. What do you recommend when you have a variety of ideas, some not in the same line of business? So lots of ideas sparking, lots of things going on. So from a clarity point of view, what would you recommend?
First of all, and this is making me smile because this is exactly what I did. I had all these ideas, and what I did was I bought a book, a big A3 sketch pad, plain paper, and I just brain dumped everything for a good few months. I didn't rush it. And I came back to it maybe once every few days, and I would probably thin it down a little bit, because you're in a different emotional space when you're looking at something every day. So it changes over time. So with that time and space, you're giving yourself the ability to get a little bit clear and essentially hone it down. And you can ask yourself questions like, which one of these feels more aligned with my beliefs and values? Because ultimately, if it's not aligned with who you are, what you believe, what kind of business you want to be in, it'll never work long time, because there's a lack of alignment there. So it's almost like you're creating a business that's part of who you are in an area that you're passionate about. So you might have a great idea, but if your heart's not in it, and it's not who you are, and it's not what you're good at, and it's not what you want to give out to the world, then go with the one that makes you feel something. So you're looking for the emotional signs, because we're so much wiser than we think, but sometimes the logical brain can muddle you up a little bit. Well, that doesn't really make sense. Who would want that? When actually your heart is being drawn to something else. So I would notice all of those emotions and just brain dump without a time restriction. Try and spend a good quality of time on that, because if this is going to be potentially the rest of your life or a portion of time, it deserves that time to get really clear.
Okay. Although, as Jeff said earlier, if you do try and do something, you do start it, and it's not for you, you go back to being the 85% until you've maybe come up with another idea, and then go back into the 15% of folk who run a business. Yeah. So,
Sorry, I was just going to jump in there. So I quite often, one of the things I just spend a lot of time with people doing is where they have got a variety of ideas, is actually getting them to sort of maybe use also the logical side. So that's kind of maybe is looking at, how easy is this opportunity going to be to access for you? And some of that might be your actual personal values and how that fits with you, but also how big it could potentially be, and actually maybe do some kind of portfolio analysis, and that you'll end up with a set of ideas that are stronger than others. And then again, coming back to what Nick said earlier on, it's they then prioritize, because at the end of the day, most of the people that we deal with are a single person business, and there's only so many hours you've got in the day to do your work and plan your work. Therefore, that focus is, the portfolio helps you choose, but then get very focused as to what tasks you are then going to do.
Yeah, brilliant. We've kind of touched, Callum, particularly you touched there on the neurodiversity side of things, and how people think is kind of also what, Nick, you were talking about. We've had a question here from someone who says they are an introvert, and every time they do something out of their comfort zone, a voice in their head stops them, and it makes them fearful of going to networking events. They've already crossed the first line of establishing their business, but the question they're asking is, how do they overcome that fear that grips them time to time? Nick, I'm going to come to you first on that.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, because it's easier than you might think. So the first thing I would say to someone in that position is to learn how to regulate your nervous system. So what happens when you go into fight or flight mode, fear kicks in, you withdraw from whatever situation you're in. But when you have tools and techniques to overcome that, the impact on your body and your brain is less. So for example, I had a client who terrified of public speaking, but had a really good message to share and was quite passionate about it. So we just worked on him finding a voice that he's happy with. So breath work, for example, before he had meetings about it, or was presenting himself, or actually doing the presentation in the end. So breathing techniques just to calm the whole system. Learning how to calm the mind. There's lots of mindfulness techniques, like you can do meditation and affirmations. And affirmations is an interesting one, because essentially with affirmations, the science behind that is you're programming your subconscious mind to believe something different. So in the case of this person, you have to program yourself to believe a little bit more in yourself than you do right now. How you feel about yourself right now is not necessarily how you're going to feel about yourself in 6 months, a year. So allowing a little bit of space to develop where you can grow is really important. And notice how you speak to yourself, because we can all be quite critical, again, naturally, but you have to notice that and say, I'm doing that again. I'm going to choose to speak to myself differently. So, you know, really changing that narrative on how you speak to yourself, noticing your thoughts and the repetitive ones that are coming up, and challenging all of that, because a lot of it is unlikely to be true.
Brilliant. Okay. Any other thoughts from Jeff or Callum on that?
I was just going to say, I said earlier on, get yourself a buddy. You know, that's, you know,
Yeah.
if you're nervous about going to networking events, if you have someone that can go with you, that, you know, I guess reduces it to a degree.
Yeah.
I'd also say there are a very wide variety of networking events that exist, some of which involve quite a high degree of participation, some of which are kind of more, you're there more there in an observational role. So it might be that what you start to do is maybe look for smaller events where you can stand on the side and observe, rather than going to a huge event where you feel you need to jump into the middle and fully participate.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's trying to pick something that maybe works on a scale and a complexity that suits you at the point you are now. Find that it's a useful experience, find it's a pleasant experience, and then gradually work up to things that are maybe a bit more challenging.
From me, I'm grateful that I've always been in many ways described as more of an extrovert than an introvert. So thankfully, when it comes to these events, I don't seem to have much problems. Why I'm actually quite good at sales in the companies. I can go out and talk lots. But I'd like to say is, if you are introverted, you think, oh, I can't do this. We've all got our own things. I struggle so much with anything that's is an awkward situation, is uncomfortable. If that's dealing with complaints, clients or staff members that aren't doing so well, and that's just something that everybody has their own little things that they have to push themselves out with, get over. And in time, I'm slowly getting better at that as well, of pushing myself out there if I have to speak to one of our team members about something I'm not happy with. But we all go through it, and it's just actually having to push yourself out there and deal with it, and realize that everyone has these things. And if you're at a networking event as well, guaranteed there'll be a lot of introverted people there that are also in the same boat as you. So yeah, just go for it.
Sorry.
Jeff.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of add to that. It's quite common for me when I'm having discussions with people that say, I don't like selling, I'm not a salesperson, you know, it's not an innate skill in many people. And so one of the discussions I have with people is kind of along the lines, well, if you're not going to sell your business, who is? Right? And then it's saying, okay, if you're not comfortable with selling, what support exists? And obviously we have the webinars that deal with, I think it's called Sales for the Non-Salesy People. We have ones that are specifically targeted at neurodiverse people. And so there is a lot of support there to help people move a little bit more towards being a salesperson as opposed to not a salesperson.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that, Jeff. We've had a question which is prefaced with silly question, maybe. I'll just say there are no silly questions in this. And actually, personally, I think this is an incredibly insightful question given what we're actually talking about. And the question is, what's the advantage of establishing a business rather than continuing with a side hustle? And I think that's a really brilliant question, because we're talking here about turning a side hustle or a hobby into a business. But actually, what's the advantage of doing that? Nick?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because everybody's aspirations are going to be different. So the first thing I would say is, do you want to? Because if you're quite happy, you know, with the side hustle and everything's good and you're enjoying it and it's fine, then, you know, that's a personal decision that no one here would be able to say you should do X, Y, and Z. But if there's a little niggle there that you could be doing more, or you want to be doing more, but there's a little bit of denial, I would say a little bit more self-exploration on, is this a story that you're telling yourself in order to avoid some kind of behavior? So you're looking for avoidance rather than contentment. If you're quite content, then absolutely great. But if there's a little bit of avoidance in there, then it needs a little bit of more time and attention to work out what you really want. Because ultimately, you know, when you take it out and you look at the big picture, if we were all to say, you know, what do we want personally? What I always tell people is, what I want for them is to achieve their own personal potential. And for each person, that's very different. That might be just working on their own. That might be expanding to a team of 5, 100. That might be a global company. But you should always aim to achieve your own personal potential, because we all have a little drive to do that. And sometimes subconsciously, sometimes it's just a little niggle that won't go away. And I think it's important to address that and give it a little bit more time and thought.
Jeff, you got any thoughts on the advantage or otherwise?
I think I said earlier on, your hybrid, there's nothing wrong with having a hybrid setup of being an employee so many days a week and being self-employed. That, you know, there's no right spectrum in that as to what's correct, and it will very much change depending on your personal circumstances. I have had a number of people, you know, I've not been doing this job very long, but I have had a number of people who have held off moving to being self-employed while their kids are still at home, because they have that kind of parental responsibility, and it's a risk they choose not to take at that point in their life. When that kind of need to absolutely feed everybody all the time is taken away and there's a bit more headroom there, then people are then maybe more prepared to, you know, shift towards the risk of setting up in a business by yourself. And there's nothing wrong with doing that and then going back and having 2 days a week as an employee. You know, it's a spectrum that you can move up and down, and you know, you don't have to say there's a correct point.
Okay, man. I'm going to get back onto our kind of things we've kind of wanted to try and cover. And Callum, I'm going to come back to yourself. As we've talked about, you've transitioned from a side hustle into a full-time business. What was the biggest challenge you faced doing that, and how did you overcome it?
So this actually in some ways relates to what Jeff and yourself were just talking about. I think the biggest side hustle was understanding the commitment for the boring things that you have to overcome, that you don't get your dopamine hit out of, that is taking away. Because the reason the side hustle probably came about was of something you're interested in, you had passion, and you enjoyed. So you started getting into it, which was gardening for me. And unfortunately, the biggest challenge is to fortunately spend days on end dealing with banks, insurance companies, sitting on the computer, not getting out there gardening, trying to build a website, things that, you know, aren't necessarily your interest. But when you are growing, and unless you're the fortunate person that's got some backer with loads of money saying, well, tell us what you want and you can just pay a website designer, you know, most people are going to have to grow and do certain stuff to get there. And it is just accepting that and trying not and let that get you down. And what I'd say is make sure when you're growing, so I've so many friends, we've talked about growing our businesses and how they don't get to do the thing they actually enjoy doing. And it is just try and find time to keep yourself motivated, to keep yourself happy, to keep getting out in the gardens occasionally. You know, last year when we were really pushing things, I could barely get into the gardens. And I suppose it would say I had to go through that to an extent. But this year, with the business plan of taking an operations manager, means I'm getting through a lot of the, you know, I'm still doing a lot of the business growth. I'm still getting to make sure I now find times. And I think that was just a journey I had to go through and accept. And if some people think, oh, I used to, you know, I gave it up because I spent my whole time dealing with rubbish. I never actually got to do the art anymore if it was a business based around art. And I'm just saying, if you hold on there, get through that point till the business is at a side where you can actually pay people to do a lot of that stuff and you can get back into doing your passion, but also try and hold on and make sure you get a chance to still do some of that when you're growing. Don't just find yourself sitting at the computer all day and then you're paying people to do the stuff that was your passion and they get that out of it. So try and find time for yourself when growing as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one you just touched on there, the kind of art side. I have a very good friend who is an extremely accomplished artist, but the business side of the business, our sister does that. You know, all the Facebook and the social media and the accountancy and all that kind of stuff, so that she just, my artist friend concentrates on doing what she loves to do and wants to do, which is produce fabulous paintings. But somebody else, a family member, is doing all the kind of donkey work behind the scenes on that.
I would be surprised
okay.
if she started off doing that until she found her family member. You know, you start doing this, you realize how much hard work it is, but when you're in your growth, you're realizing that is essential and will help the business grow. So you take it on. And then, like myself, I was doing all the finance, and then I found my mum, she was looking to retire. She wanted to get involved. She stepped in, and it's been absolutely amazing. And again, I've started delegating things to gardeners that are good at doing social media now that we've grown, because I'm not good at social media. But the point was, yes, you'll probably have to go for the journey of having to do that stuff, but hold on there and you will grow and you will delegate and you will get to going back to your art or get to get in the gardens and again.
Absolutely. Jeff, I'm conscious of the time. So can I briefly come back to yourself? How do you encourage confidence in startups?
I think just sort of focusing on the successes they've had. You know, actually, you know, a lot of time people don't give themselves credit for what they've already achieved. You know, I've had people turn up with me. A prime example was a Fake Food Workshop who said to me, "I'm only a kitchen table startup," and I said, "You are an exporter. You're exporting 40% of your turnover to international clients." I said, "You know, don't ever describe yourself as a I am only. You know, you are a success. You have already been successful. You will be more successful in the future." So trying to sort of get people to look at what they've achieved rather than, there can always be a list of what you want to achieve that you haven't done yet, but actually you've already done a lot, and actually there's nothing wrong with what you're doing.
I'm kind of thinking also again on that kind of line of the confidence kind of side of things. I suppose from the point of view, Callum, you've said there, what strategies have been most effective in building your confidence as a business owner over time? You were talking about that, that journey over time of having to go through all these things to get to there. From a confidence point of view, what strategies have you adopted?
Goals in terms of, right, we want to do this, and looking at our goals and starting to hit them as well. You know, things like we do want to be a VAT registered company, it's undeniable, so that is one of our goals. So I think, yeah, basically hitting the goals as well. And rather than just going and doing work, I spent quite a bit of time building networks and gathering other people, which has just brought other people back to us who want to work with us. You know, a classic example, still the Power Tool company recently, that's given us so much confidence that they have come to us and said, we want to work with you. So we have spent time networking with other people in the industry and got feedback from them, and that has just, yeah, again, been really good for our confidence. So not staying in our own little bubble, looking outwards as well, and then working with other people and seeing how well we're doing, and then hitting our goals. And occasionally, the other thing I did with my staff, we had a staff night the other day, just took a step back and think, wait, a year ago we were here. God, you know, you can just get caught up in the moment and what's going on around you seems normal. But if you take a step back and look at where you were a year ago, you can give yourself confidence. And this is things I never used to do, but I'm getting better at, going back to something we talked about later on, understanding your brain and knowing how to give yourself your confidence as well, and not just looking at the negatives that you can sometimes get caught up in if you're overworked and whatnot.
Yep. Jeff, briefly.
So just a very brief one, encouraging people to enter competitions, you know, to actually look at how you will stack up against your peers, and saying, well, you know, the worst that's going to happen is you're just not going to get shortlisted, you know, but actually by writing up the entry to the competition, it makes you reflect on your business, and you know, you sell it, you know, you pull out the good things and disregard the negatives, you know, and you know.
So that was a big one for us, where someone suggested enter a business. I thought it was a good excuse to write copy on us. It'd be handy copy to have for emails or updating websites. And yeah, I didn't even realize that it was a UK competition. I thought it was a Scotland one. It was something that landed on me. And before we knew it, we ended up at an award thing down in London for Best New Business. And it was a massive confidence boost. But even as Jeff said, getting everything down in writing, you know, going through a bit of that experience, saying, why are we good? And the questions they asked before they entered to the competition was a lovely experience. And yeah, it was great. So I can definitely say we're going for another big one soon as well. We want to go for the Edge Awards and stuff. And that is stuff, even just feedback and getting involved in that stuff is good for your confidence. Don't worry about rejection. The fact that you've gone out, you've gone through it as well, I think is a really good thing as well.
Absolutely. We've shared in the chat various links to webinars that Business Gateway runs. Nick, I know you had some additional resource that you were going to be able to share with us, even in the form, I think, of some homework for people. So
yes,
thank you for that.
A little chance for a deep dive into some questions that you can ask to just see where your confidence at. So I'm going to send over a confidence analysis. And just one final thing I wanted to mention, because I know we're up on time, is please everyone remember that your confidence is something that has to be nurtured. Don't expect it just to appear one day. It has to really be something that you grow and develop and uncover with time. And it's, you know, stack the experiences, because the confidence will grow as you go, and leaning out of that comfort zone and doing things that, you know, you might not necessarily think you're capable of. Every little thing counts.
Excellent. And final brilliant words from you, Nick. A huge thank you to my panel who've joined us today to give us their expertise and their knowledge. Thank you all to everyone out there who has joined us today. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that gave you some real interesting food for thought. And we'll see you again on another webinar. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.